Senator Franken.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Mr. Gump, for the stories that you shared. Heard a lot of those up on the Iron Range in Minnesota from steelworkers. I want to thank Ms. Bovbjerg for your testimony. I was struck by the problems that the GAO identified in the report on how closely they mirror those of the groups I've talked to, of steelworkers and retirees that I've talked to on the Iron Range in Minnesota. Their pensions were taken over by the PBGC in 2002 and 2003, and the problems that followed led them to form a group like Mr. Gump it belongs to. These steelworkers have told me that the PBGC failed to communicate with them for years at a time, and that the information they did receive didn't fully explain the situation they were facing. Additionally, many of these workers were employed at different mining operations, which made, I guess, it more complicated for everybody in computing their benefits, and it really left them wondering what their benefits would be. And then many of them were subject to recoupment. They had to pay back overpayments. And I'm very troubled to see that the problems that we had in 2002 seem to be repeating themselves 7 years later in your audit. In your audit, did you encounter any of these Minnesota steelworkers? And first, I'd like to ask you that.
We did talk to a number of steelworkers. I think we might have talked with some from National Steel. Mainly, we got our information from PBGC and from the experiences of prior terminations. We did go back to 2002, 2003 when we looked at these things. I think that we were concerned, like you, that there are going to be so many more big, complex terminations coming into PBGC in the future. And at that time that we were doing this work, Delphi was in the wings, that we felt that it was really urgent that PBGC do the things that they can to make this process easier for people. They can't change the law as to what the benefit guarantees are, but certainly they can change the way that they work with people, the frequency with which they talk to people, the complexity with which they provide information. There's always that trying to achieve a balance between
Precisely,
the technical accuracy and actually communicating
They
with
didn't hear
people
from
who
them
were not
for
actuaries.
years. There were years between when they'd hear from them
Yes.
being alerted that they were going to be in BBGC and then what the outcome was. Who could change those laws? Oh, it's us.
Yeah. I'm glad I didn't have to tell you.
Yeah. Well, because I want to ask Mr. Jury about this, because you work with the steelworkers. I got the endorsement of the steelworkers up in Hibbing very early, and I went down into kind of a locker room area, and the president of the local introduced me to the guys, saying, "This is Al Franken. We're endorsing him. And do you have any questions?" And the guy stood up and said, "Yeah, what are you going to do to protect our pensions?" And I really didn't know what to say to him. And I'm glad I'm here because I really want to know what I can say to him. The fact of the matter is that these, they're guys who worked for 38 years in the mines, expecting that they would get a pension, of $1,200 a month. And it went to the PBGC and they got, or $2,400 a month, and they end up getting like $600-700. and they're 58 years old, and they had kids in college, and they weren't on Medicare yet, and they had health problems after working for 38 years at taconite mine. And they'd say that a company, I'm sorry I'm over my time, but I just want to finish this and get an answer quick. They'd say the mine went bankrupt, or the entity that owned the mine went go bankrupt. I lose my pension. The next day, they'd be open again under some new ownership. And I'd be working again, except I'd start from zero. What can we do as a body to prevent that kind of thing from happening? How can I give this guy an answer? What's the answer I can give him?
Well, thank you, Senator. That's a fair point, and those same frustrations that were expressed to you were expressed to me as well. I'm a union-side labor lawyer that spends too much time in bankruptcy court, and I was around the National Steel bankruptcy and the Eveleth Mining or Thunderbird Mining bankruptcy cases where there were pension plan terminations. We've addressed today questions about how to prevent the next generation, whether they're on the Iron Range or elsewhere, about protecting and elevating the interest of workers and retirees by smoothing out some of these onerous funding requirements, also eliminating what we think are some gratuitous provisions that cut off benefit guarantees when a company files in bankruptcy, which is an event the worker has absolutely no control over. In addition, I note that in the last Congress there was bankruptcy reform legislation introduced, and if introduced again, there's much about that bankruptcy reform legislation that would further the interests and the protections of workers and retirees in bankruptcy. It's a comprehensive approach. In addition, it brings to mind the need for speedier processing of these cases, and while I won't comment upon the merits of this Thunderbird mining case that's pending here, I simply note that the pension plan there terminated in, I think, July of 2003. We are still litigating that some of the determinations PBGC made, and certainly, as others have said, the sooner a retiree knows what his or her future bears, undoubtedly that's the better course.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you very much.